The password is 3981.
Charan. What is word at all?
We can start.
No, orientation is locked. You have to change. Get volunteer. नहीं सर ऑन चाहिए
Good evening, distinguished architects, esteemed guests, and friends. Architecture is more than a profession. It is an art, a science, and a profound responsibility. Your presence here today signifies something powerful, a collective commitment to pushing boundaries, reimagining possibilities, and sharing knowledge that will inspire the next generation of architects. This gathering is not about reflecting on past achievements, but about forging new ideas, new collaborations, and new paths forward. Today, we have the privilege of hosting a thought-provoking panel discussion featuring some of the most distinguished minds in the field. It is an absolute honor to welcome each of you to this gathering of brilliant minds and visionary creators. I welcome our dignitaries, jury members, Architect Ravindra Vasavara, Architect Partho Rajan Das, Architect Kuila Suganya, and Architect Satya Prakash Varnas. Our esteemed panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives. We humbly welcome Reva University's Pro Vice Chancellor, Dr. R.C. Baradar, School of Architecture's Director, Architect Sudhir Acharya, our HOD, Dr. Teja Vermana, and our team of faculty. As student representatives from NASA India Council, we welcome Tanuja Sunkara, Trophy's Head, and Likit Jian, Zonal President, Zone 5, as key contributors to the success of today's event of the Louis I. Kahn Jury, supporting our institute's NASA team every step of the way. And last but not the least, the attendees of today's event. As we gather here to celebrate the impact of art and architecture, it is only fitting that we do so in a space dedicated to excellence in education and innovation. With that, allow me to introduce Reva University, Bangalore, a distinguished institution that has been at the forefront of academic brilliance and architectural advancement. Nestled in the vibrant city of Bangalore, Reva University stands as a beacon of knowledge, nurturing the next generation of architects, engineers, and visionaries. Through its state-of-the-art infrastructure, forward-thinking curriculum, and commitment to research, the university has established itself as a hub for aspiring professionals eager to redefine the built environment. Reva University's School of Architecture in particular has been instrumental in shaping creative and socially responsible architects. By blending traditional wisdom with modern technology, the institution ensures that its students not only understand the principles of design, but also the responsibility that comes with it. As we celebrate the role of education in shaping the architects of tomorrow, it is essential that we recognize the institutions and organizations that empower students beyond the classroom. One such remarkable body is the National Association of Students of Architecture, NASA, India. The world's largest architectural student organization comprising of over 300 member colleges from India and beyond. Established in 1957, it is an autonomous, non-profit and democratic organization dedicated to undergraduate architecture students. NASA, India serves as a platform for learning, interaction, and professional growth, bridging the gap between the students and professionals while voicing students' concerns in architectural education. It promotes collaboration, research, and community service, sustaining a legacy of over 67 years through student leadership and engagement. Now I would like to call upon the stage Likit Jain, Zonal President, Zone 5, NASA, India, to take forward today's panel discussion proceedings.
Greetings everyone. This is Likit Jain, Zonal President, Zone 5, NASA, India. Before we begin the proceedings of panel discussion, we have something very important, and that is the launch of our 66th year Louis Kahn Trophy book. And for the same, we would like to call upon our jurors and moderators, as well as Director of School of Architecture, Vice Chancellor of the University, and HOD of School of Architecture, Reva University, on the stage to launch the 66th year Louis Kahn Trophy book and comic book. Please join us, sir.
Landscape.
Keep this in the middle. It's a bit tight. It will not break, but I have to. We'll keep on a chair or something. I can't keep it in landscape.
Why do we keep it in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, ma'am, Nishita ma'am, we can keep there in middle. We have stand. Stand we have. We have to keep it in middle. We'll keep there. Yeah, ma'am.
Moving on to the felicitations for this event, I request each of the panel members, as you have called, please come onto the stage so we can felicitate you. Okay, I request architect Partharaj Parthadas sir to please come on stage. A round of applause, everyone.
YouTube office.
Thank you, sir. I request architect Ravindra Vasavada sir. I request architect Koili Suganya ma'am.
Raj Gupta and Madam, sorry Madam, I have to see your name, and then Suganya Madam and Partha Das. So the great people here with a few words of interaction, you get to know the significance of this type of activity to motivate the young architect. Since I am entirely from different background, I may not be able to give the real required gist of what the panel discussion and other things. And now you are going to witness this great panelists, the ideas emerging out of this panel discussion would be helpful to you to take your ideas further. And I request all the jury members, it's not only sir, on this occasion, you are here. We hope you are there with us in future for all our endeavors for the benefit of our people and the society. Thank you once again, sir. Thank you all the participants and Faculty of Architecture. I should tell one last word. Faculty of Architecture here, all the staff members in the architecture school are very enthusiastic and young people. They are always looking at what is the innovation and creativity that can be brought into the classroom. And always they are coming with a demand, because I am overlooking these departments as an administration, and we see that a lot of zeal and enthusiasm with these young people, young faculty members. That is where again another responsibility, what I feel, we request you again to see how the young faculty members can be made, making their ideas realizable through their students. This is what we expect from this forum, sir. Thank you once again, sir and madam, for all of your presence, and wish you all the best for all the participants and faculty. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words, sir. I request Likith Jain to please come and move on with the further discourse of the panel.
Thank you, madam.
Now I would like to call upon our panelists for the day on the stage to start with the panel discussion. Firstly, architect Ravindra Vasavada sir, who's an architect and conservation and heritage building conservation, and architect Koili Suganya ma'am, architect Partha Ranjan Das sir. Please come forward on the stage, sir and ma'am. And our trophy moderator, architect Satya Prakash Varnasi sir, also on the stage for the moderation. And additionally, Tanuja Sunkara, Trophies Head of NASA India for the 67th year, to be the student moderator for the panel today.
We have to shoot it into a panel, right? We'll go back and then zoom in. I love this. Fine, all.
Additionally, I would like to thank our jurors for stage one, that is architect Ruturaj Parekh sir, director and founder of Studio Matter, then architect Chaitali Babar ma'am. She has done her masters from SEP University, and also architect Ravindra Vasavda sir, who was there with us for stage one jury as well, and is present here for stage two jury as well. Now, Tanja will take over the proceedings.
A very good evening to one and all present here. I'm Tanuja Sunkara and I'm serving as the Trophies Head for 67th year in the NASA India. We have the 67th year Kahn post-duty panel discussion, and we have our trophy moderator and panelist, Sir Satyaprakash Varanasi here. And I'm very honored to be moderating an esteemed and diverse panel like this. Firstly, Sir Architect Partha Rajun Das sir, Architect Sunita Dania ma'am, and Architect Ravindra Vasavda sir.
Zoom out. Oh, zoom in a bit. It takes time.
So I think we'll be listening few words, sir's 2 cents.
Zoom a bit.
Most of you know about Sunday Lake. So when you know it, there's no point saying anything because you already know it.
Where is like
Which means I can decide it.
they're asking we are not going live on Insta or something.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Tanuja, you did a great job in coordinating this whole event, and Likith also has been part of all this.
Say your name.
So thank you both. And on behalf of NASA, I'm also welcoming all the jurors for the great job they have done both in the first round and this. Let me give a very quick background to this year's certificate. There were about 71 entries, which was a record of sorts. Great job. And in the first round, online, we had about 40 plus entries, 42 entries, which were then shortlisted to the 15, which are in the field. Like it's already mentioned about the online jurors, Ruturaj Parekh, Chaitali Babar, and sir, of course, was also there in the first round. That's about the statistics part. Secondly, about the theme.
This is better.
So typically, as we all know, LIK trophy is for documentation. So the primary purpose is documentation. That continues to be so. But then within the documentation, what are you learning by doing the documentation, other than documenting, of course, other than observing and absorbing and sketching and measuring and drafting, what else do we learn? So there's something to learn from them. So this year we thought one of the things that can be learned is how to essentialize the building, how to go to the level of elemental. That's about it. And the jury brief is, so some of you possibly have already gone through it, those are from this institute, and we also have been told it's online streaming, so across India, we don't know really how many are watching this, but most of you are watching already have an idea about the brief. Coming to the selection of the jurors, at NASA we have been very one aspect as such. And the kind of jurors we have, for example, this year we have Professor Vasavada, who is one of the biggest names in India for documentary, and also theorizing what is being documented. I'm not really speaking about his other credentials, I'm just leaving it at that level. And Partharanjan Das is a very curious combination of architecture, urban design and heritage put together. And Phil Suganya is also an interesting combination of architecture and then into conservation. Finally now she is into archaeology. So and everybody has been involved both in consultancy and in practice. I think they're also more into research and all of them as well now. So the idea of the jury panel is to bring in different kind of skills and faculties into jury panel so that there will be fair judgment happening around.
These are all Indian NASA things.
I'm saying this also for record for the people who are hearing so that all those who have participated should know how this whole thing has been conducted. That's the reason why one is giving this kind of background information. Then how the whole the trophy is conducted, the structuring of it. Thanks to NASA, they have been asking me to moderate it. So I would come up with 2 or 3 themes. Sometimes the NASA Council also suggests, this year also there was one suggestion from the Council, Evantik, and you all suggested one theme. So we had 3 themes this year. From these 3 themes, the Council will deliberate upon it and then they will shortlist any one theme. And then that one theme is elaborated into a long text or whatever. Then we also check whether the theme is something that anybody across India, student, can they work on it. So the theme should not be something which only people from metropolitan cities can work upon or something like that. No. Anybody should be able to work on the theme from across India. So we keep it very general with having, of course, certain frame of reference. Because if there is no frame of reference, then anybody can do anything. Which will happen. Which unfortunately today is happening. I hope I can say this. Quite a bit of modern architecture in India, for the even across the world. We nowadays, it's not my word, but I've read somebody writing it saying what's happening today is an architecture of anywhere, anytime, anyhow. Because any kind of architecture can be now built anyhow, anywhere. Back to this the NASA theme. So we wanted to ensure the NASA stays, the LIK trophy stays comparatively more rooted. That's what we have been attempting. So with this very quick background, I think we'll pass it on for the jury comments. So the way we have structured this discussion today is that initially they'll all speak for some 2-3 minutes very briefly. They'll give their kind of an overview comment because then more comments will come depending on the inquiries and question answers and sharing of opinions. So once they are done with, it will go over to the audience who are here. Who's taking the online inquiries and all? Oh, somebody is on there. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So whatever queries come or sharing comes in the online, one of you we assume will be reading out loud so that they will be also responding it. There also could be some queries and sharing of thoughts which are to do with the trophy in actuality. It could be about how it's conducted. It could be, of course, about the jurors' opinion about what's happening around. Other than the overall comments which they are going to give now, there can be more specific comments coming later on. We'll also look at that as we go along. So with that, first, yeah, I'll pass the mic to Partharanjan Das from Kolkata.
The online queries,
Good evening,
no? Other than this, nowhere else you are posting,
Today,
right?
we saw about
Some comments are coming, but no one is questioning anything. Yeah.
And it was difficult for us to select 3 and then finally 5 among these. So we went through a process and selected, we qualified 9 or 10, then we sat together, broke our heads, and finally selected who would be finally awarded the prize. And by going through them, I realized something
Put it here, okay.
which I wanted to suggest to the NASA
Who is having the
or organizers that
mic?
especially for Louis Kahn Trophy, when we look at projects, there are 2 kinds of documentations which can happen. If we are documenting a temple or a mosque or a church,
Where is another?
the future
This girl is Anna, it's with her.
Huh?
It's with her, Tanuja.
Ask her to take it and give it here. One stand there to take it and give it here.
So the focus of the team which is surveying and document
So
whereas these are studying, let's say, an old dilapidated
Kritika,
fort or
stand
a
in the
palace
corner
or any old
for passing
structure
the mic here.
which can be put to
If questions come here
adaptive
or from
use.
here, you
The
pass the mic
focus
here
of the
or just
study
give the
or
mic if anyone
documentation
has
becomes
something.
different.
Just stand
If
there, okay?
that can be
And
clearly
also, just
mentioned
can you
in
move
next
that chair
year's design
further towards the
brief,
Should I
then it will be easier for the students to do it and also easier for the jury to
And if you want to
make
control,
judgment. But
just
otherwise,
pull this to the
all
right to go
it
left
will
and pull this to
without
the right.
How
saying,
this, okay?
and
So
I only hope
this
that
will go
this
there.
kind of question
And then if you double tap the jiggle, it will come back to the previous position. This one, the one in the middle, the one here, right? There is a one behind. Yeah. So if you tap this, double tap, it will come back to the position. Okay?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here, and also in the first round. My association with this trophy is quite long, and I have
This audio is fine.
on
It
couple
should
of
be keep it in
times
front.
been on the jury at several schools of architecture.
We need to keep it.
What we saw in first and second round was a huge amount of documentation. And the buildings selected were also unique in their own sense. And it was really a pleasure to go through. For me, it was also something, which is good to see, is the evolution of the techniques and presentation over the years. Because when we started, our emphasis was only on hand drawings. But then gradually it has really grown, keeping pace with the developing digital technology. So I think there is more and more expertise being shown on the digital, tools. And this makes the whole thing, quite different from the earlier times. But I think it is progressive in a sense. And this is good to see. And the other good thing that I came to know is the kind of publication that is coming out, which is a wonderful idea. And every year's projects are published. So this is something which also is very encouraging, because I think students in general can see this all over the country. And that, in a sense, encourages the students to get into this kind of work, which eventually would, extend to, caring for heritage, doing research in history, and also, putting the ideas together about what one can do with the heritage. So I think this kind of competitions really help in, in understanding this kind of, activities, and I think it is something, which is extremely satisfactory to see over a period of time. So overall experience for this particular year's jury was very good, and I think those who have done excellent work, they will really be excellently, encouraged. And those who haven't really made to the, this kind of upper strata will need to somehow work harder. So this is what I would say as a panelist. And it would be great to have more and more students involved in this kind of work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Satya, and thank you all of you for inviting me. So I'm actually very emotionally attached here, sitting here today. Satya was my mentor. Way back in '94, I was a student, and I learned about heritage from him. And then on, I moved from architecture to conservation. So with that, documentation was my passion, and I was just working on documentation of heritage structures in Karnataka for 2 decades. And then now I've moved into research. So this was an amazing experience for me to go through all the drawings. And I come from an era of handmade drawings. and I've also attempted LIK trophy, right? And lost, but I always believed that heritage can teach me more, and with that I moved into heritage. And since about the NASA and the positiveness and what was very amazing, other jurors have explained. So one thing which I've also been, I used to struggle as a student was that what's beyond documentation? How can I kind of look into the analysis part? What can I learn from these heritage buildings? So one thing that over the period in this last 30 years I've learned is that to place the building in the context of the landscape and the society. So this is something I would want to share. And right now my research is also focusing more on that. I look beyond buildings, and I kind of believe buildings don't stand in isolation in the landscape, and look into what other structures and what other people are attached to this heritage structure. It could be historic or historical. So this is still missing in the competition. The students have tried their best, but there's more to learn from it. Give it a try, and you will be at it. My research is on that, and I can confidently say placing the monument or the historic structures in the context of landscape and the society will give you more guiding light for your design too. So I still find that still not kind of showing up in the entries. There is an attempt, but I think future people have to start looking at the building in the context, and it's not in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you, dear jurors. I think that was very elaboratively put, and a general feedback I'm sure would definitely help participants from next year on. So there are a few questions, again, to be more precise about the whole feedback. So what were the key aspects that were looked into while evaluating the submissions? Each of you could go.
We looked at, how they have explained the history, the context, how they have explained the various elements of construction, and whether they have done any structural mapping, defect mapping, and whether they have suggested any courses to be taken for future restoration and all that. These are the few aspects which we have gone through. I don't know whether it's really fair to judge it like that, because these criteria were not given to schools. But these are normally considered when looking at blue card problem. And there are many other aspects of how to do the documentation, how to write history. I mean, research on history, but we have to present it in a presentable form, and then we have to relate to the other aspects of your drawing, so that there is a gradual flow. And graphics is one aspect which, as you depend more and more on computers, I've seen that there are certain aspects of graphics where you really have to learn how to present, the balancing, the grays and the whites and the blacks. That is still lacking in all the presentation, but that I think there is plenty of time to learn. But these are basically the modules that I have looked into.
I agree with Partha, and first is the choice. What kind of example you're choosing? Now that choice also has to be justified. So that amounts to description. And this description normally deals with history and the importance of that particular example to the cultural context of the place. So this is one. Second is, how do you conduct your field work? Because everybody has submitted field notes. Now these field notes are the basis of what you do further. Now field notes are very important. The methods with which you study or measure a building is very important. And in most cases, field notes appear to be a kind of last minute presentation. It didn't really appear to be something on which you based your final presentation. So that field work is something, which is of great importance for us to judge how you work on a historic building. And the third thing, that was important was your report. Now this report is essentially your understanding of the building, its history, and what is the status in terms of just, its condition, not in detail, but just in nutshell, how it stands today. And then how, if you have to really, sort of preserve this, what kind of ideas you get, what needs preservation. Now all this is not just nutshell, one has to mention. And that's why I think this year the theme was given was elements. So this elemental study is something, which was very vital for the presentation this year. And this elemental study actually leads you to understanding the structural condition of the building. So these are the points based on which we actually went going around. We just went through these projects. And these were also, in a sense, becoming like criteria for our judgment. So this is what I would like to say.
Thank you. They've said it all. And one other extra criteria which we also looked into was the technical aspects of the architectural drawing. Simple things like north, scale, if the doors are represented well, wall thicknesses, dimensions. So there have been, like in one of the drawings, there was a room shown with no doors, and the scale of the human being was way too large than the building. Simple things. There's no threshold. So I was looking into all of this, not sign, to be more, these are basics, right? So the technicalities. I love working drawings, so I was looking at that.
In principle, normally when we set up a theme, NASA does not give a set of criteria. This is to answer your question. I know that some of these things, what she's written down, have come from students already. Some of the students I've already asked them about this. So she's already collected about 4 or 5 queries already which have come from her. So we don't really give a set of criteria as such. We leave it to the jurors. And also the criteria will vary from year to year. So if adaptive reuse is one of the sub-themes, then there will be criteria based on adaptive reuse. Because we have done it in 1 year. So it also varies from year to year. Now, having said this, we should also talk about what could be the criteria of qualification and disqualification. This is something we really would like to say, and on behalf of my family, we assume there are people also listening, and they can also give the reaction. While this year 71 entries has been a record of entries, this year also we saw the record of disqualification. And it's not a very great thing to speak about. So we were having this criteria for selection finally, but in many entries, Queen Ma'am was talking about how some of the basics were missing. There was another kind of basic which was missing in many entries, and this statement goes to all of you listening online as well as those who are here. The set of criteria given as qualifying statement, many of them were not followed by many students. So out of 71, how many rejections, how many were disqualified? 51. 50. 20 finally. Can you believe this? Can you believe that out of 71 entries, nearly 20 were disqualified? Didn't even come to this last round. Because there are many small things they did not just follow which was there in the brief. Most of you who have worked on this, we know are from second year, third year architecture. Fair enough, we understand. But at your age, the kind of qualifying statements which were in the brief, in future, when you people are really going to be consulting and practicing, is akin to the brief we get from the clients in a project. If a client walks in and if you are not following what they have told us to follow, most of them will walk out of us. They will not sit with us anymore. They will go to other architects who will follow their briefing. So one request, incidentally this comes from all of us, whatever briefing is given in the future, please follow it word by word. If you have any doubts, there is a system, you can ask the queries, there's always a set of queries will come. Please do send your queries and the NASA Council and we together will be responding to your queries. But please don't ignore what is being told. It is not to set you on an instructed path. Please don't take it that way that, oh, you have to do only what is instructed. It's not really that. Yes, to some extent Indian culture is too much of instructions and European culture, as we know, students of architecture are not so much of instructions. Here we have, if I may say so, there are too much of instruction for this part of Indian culture. So it's not really a negative sense of instruction, it is following what has been set out as a brief, because there has to be some kind of a common denominator for everybody. I just wanted to say it in between somewhere around. I hope it's okay. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Anything coming on online? Because very often online people get deprived of being answered. Any online query already?
No, sir.
Not yet.
I'm sure again the answers were quite elaborate. There were quite few questions of recurring around feedback, review, key aspects, improvements. But again, the jurors have already answered in a flow. But I would definitely ask one question from my end would be, what are the key aspects for students to strengthen their future entries? If you could leave a suggestion of how to look at documentation for our generation in layman's language.
First of all, you have to be focused, and it's like preparing a shooting script. If you know what you're going to present, then divide your presentation into all the sheets, do a rough sketch, and put only those information which are relevant. Like on many of your history part, I have seen that you have researched a lot, you have written a lot of history about the building, the heritage structure, but many of the historical aspects or incidents that mentioned here are not relevant to the building. If an old Nawab or a king has fought with another Nawab or king, if during that war a part of that building or a fort was destroyed, then it is relevant. If it was just a war which happened 300, 400 years ago, it is not relevant. So you have to try and do a little bit of culling and remove that extra flab from your presentation. If you are crisp to your presentation, then that will make more sense. That is my presentation. If you can, normally people don't do it, but I do it all the time. Prepare something like a shooting script, very roughly. These are my sheets. This is how I'm going to divide my entire presentation. Don't start with history, because you get carried away and it becomes endless.
Well, Professor Partharanjan has needs to leave to catch a flight. So thank you very much for being with us, and so thank you very much. We'll catch up some other day in NASA or wherever. They wanted a group photo with you before you leave. One is in NASA records. Who wants to join? You should be here. Shubhiji ma'am and Sujit, please. Koti, the design chair. It's for records, I think. It's okay. Please come in, just for their memories and records to say that who else have to be called upon. I don't know all of you, so I'm sorry I can't. Yeah, Professor Raghu, the HOD.
Well, documentation is a very serious affair. And it is something with which we can understand buildings. It's a process. So there are, I used to have in my school, when we were studying, when I was teaching, there was in late 70s, we started a related study program. Now this intention of this program was to train students for documenting buildings. Now, there are these kind of subjects introduced in European schools. So students really get training on how to document a building. And it's a special subject with its own theory. It deals with the skills that one should really have. It also deals with instrumentation that one really needs to understand to use. And it also must eventually make you aware about construction and building materials. So in other words, you see, the training becomes a very important, consideration if you have to really do good documentation. It also helps you to palpate the building. You sort of touch the material. You look at a building. You try to understand the load transfers, how loads are transferred, and how in different cultures there is a kind of, methods with which they really do this primary role of load transference. Because buildings are ultimately showing you all this over a period of time. Many times it is also said that history of architecture is nothing else but history of construction. And when you study this particular sentence, and if you really open up to understand it from this point of view, then you will realize that history of construction is nothing else but to study and attempt history of spanning the spaces. So similarly, if you understand this kind of ideas, I think your faculties become very sharp. And then there is a whole lot of methods, which you really employ. Now, this is actually a very large subject, which I cannot really deal with it now. But I have personally taken several, documentation workshops for Council of Architecture, which are actually working with buildings, and faculty actually takes part in this, because this entire issue was started by Council of Architecture to train faculty to somehow, pass on this kind of knowledge to students. So it was a very, definitive effort which Council started with NIASA, and then NIASA conducted documentation workshop. So it's a very important field which I think you have to really understand, and you have to actually practice this. My own, my own understanding is also this, because even today, I involve in documentation activities for my own studies of architecture. I basically study temple architecture, and to measure a temple is a very difficult task because of its complexities. So I have even ended up, innovating an instrument myself which can take 3 dimensions at a time. Now this is something which I developed myself because of my need. Because every time I wanted to, measure a temple, the moldings, which are curvilinear, the projections, which are horizontal, and the verticals, these 3 dimensions with angularity has to be met, and it used to take a lot of time. So with my continuous practice, I really developed a scale which took all these 3 things for me at a time. And it reduced my labor. And it also reduced my ability to transfer, the time that I need to transfer on paper. I always do first draft on graph paper on scale. From graph paper on site, I transfer them to tracings. And then from tracings, to a opaque paper, drawing paper. And nowadays, I also transfer it on AutoCAD. But after doing all this, never directly on AutoCAD, but never missing this process. So I think process is very important. I think I'll end here, otherwise I think I'll be too long.
He's covered almost all of it. As he was talking, like, take it down on the graph sheet and all that, in a lighter note. I remember way back in 95, we went for a documentation, and then we forgot a lot of measurements. So we are back in Bangalore, and one of our friends, we were wondering how big was the beam. And then he said the beam was this big. And my friend went and measured that, and we transferred. I come from that generation too. In a very lighter note, but coming back to the serious note, that's definitely not documentation. And just to add to what Basavada said, I largely see even in the presentations, the entries, that the buildings are seen more on the surface. The spaces are also recorded as the surface. The outer skin is recorded. What goes inside the wall? There are walls which are 1.3 meters, just neatly marked. But what goes into making that 1.3 meter wall is not understood. Vertical sections are marked, no lintels. The section is does go through the window or a door, no lintels, no thought about beams, how a parapet is sitting. Like if you start understanding like a surgeon, what goes inside the building. So it's also a living thing. I mean, personally for me, the buildings are also a living thing. What goes into the cross sections is very important. As much as somebody has recorded the skin of it, somehow the internal ones are missing. And the other one that I would always do when I'm going on documentation thing is, like, I prepare a checklist and I tick, have I recorded this, have I recorded this, have I recorded this. Even for the sheets, not signed, just check. Checklist helps for me always, like a travel itinerary. Have I picked up my brush, like that? That's all I can just add to.
Just one line or two, should I just proceed? This is the importance of documentation. As students or even as practicing consultant architects, we make drawings. And imagine the building would look like this, imagine the building would translate from the drawings to building like this. Learning, architectural learning is a learning which happens in imagination. Of course, when you are consulting, the buildings get built, but it takes certain time for the buildings to get built. So one of the beauty of and one of the strength of documentation, and extending what Professor Vasavada said, is that in the process of documentation, we know how a building translates into a drawing. And if you really do a lot of these observations, study of buildings and translate them into the drawing, And if you are thorough in this particular skill of visualizing how a building translates to a drawing, our own skills imagining how a drawing translates into a building will also improve. So the more and more we observe, the more and more we study existing buildings and see what does it mean to see a building in drawing, is also to see how the drawing becomes a building. So it really helps a lot, as to say. Just one big liner here in response to the workshops what Saraswati has been conducting. It's already known, but I'm just announcing it very quickly. Every year now NASA has been hosting a lot of these documentation workshops. Last year in Bangalore it was conducted by Bakul Jani, who was your student, mentored by you, and Pankaj Modi. I also want to thank Pankaj Modi here. Pankaj Modi was on the jury last year, and I reached out to him saying, Pankaj, we want to suggest some jurors for LIK trophy this year, and he suggested your name. Though of course we have each other for decades, I wouldn't have thought of you if not for Pankaj. So I want to thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Yes, sir, to be more precise, yes, we're doing a lot of Kahn programs that are exclusively based on documentation, getting the best in the country to teach students how to do documentation. And there's one currently happening right now in Ahmedabad as we speak. So, yes, I think that was very put, quite elaboratively explained by all the jurors and Sir moderator as well. So now I think we can open the floor for queries from participants online and offline as well. Over to you.
You need not only queries, you can share your experiences, it can be some insights, some awareness, that's the issue. Anyone?
I think meanwhile, there are a few questions on a lighter note. If architecture, of course, is a constantly evolving journey. So we would really love to know how your individual journeys has helped to shape perspectives respectively. If you could speak about that.
In a lighter note, if it is on a lighter note, I used to walk the streets of all the settlements and observe things. So that's how I developed my career. I was never indoors, never doing drawings indoors. So I think that's a nice way to start your learning. And thanks to Satya for that. I've always been walking the streets, market squares, and challenge oneself. Like simple things like as I'm walking down a street, like say if it is in a settlement which I'm not generally known, like in a new place, say Nepal, I'm walking in Patan or I'm walking in some remote Gujarat village. All that I do is like what I might see once I reach there. So that keeps me exciting. I would even look at which direction is the water flowing when I'm approaching the settlement. I mean, all this I've learned from all my seniors. When you go out on field work, they would just loosely say this, and I've written down, and then I wrote a whole thesis on this. So observing on field, being outdoors, has helped me understand architecture. Though I was supposed to say it on a very lighter note, but it's a serious business for me. That's what I do.
I will begin with, I'll just say a few things, because I think it's because I have gone a long way. The first task which was given to us to sketch a building was when we were studying architecture. And the emphasis was on sketching. You have to sketch, and you have to sketch like an artist. And when the artist sketch a real situation, they do it by a particular process. You know, we were taught as fine art students, we were taught to always hold a pencil like this. And, you know, we see in perspective. So whatever element we were sketching, we were supposed to measure it like this with our thumb in perspective. And that we transfer on paper as a dimension that we see. So that actually brought the sense of perspective as well as sense of reality of measurements in your sketch. It was not just a visual sketch, but it was a kind of conscious transfer of the object that you look at. And that training also started in our first year when we were expected to sketch like this, like an artist, with a pencil. Because when you put your eyesight, the cone of your eye is something which can really measure what you are looking at. And that thumb that you place becomes the measure that you have to transfer. So it is a notion of scale, and this is natural because I think your vision is a cone. And when you understand your eyes, the way they see, is something which is included in this method. We had no idea of actual scale of inch or centimeter, but this was the visual scale that we were taught to study. So likewise, when we went into training, I went to Doshi's office in training. Doshi was also upcoming at that time, and he was also, wanting students, from Baroda, because at that time the only school near in Gujarat was Baroda. And he thought that we all must be trained in this kind of art because he knew I was MS University School in those days. So instead of asking us to work on buildings that he was designing, he put three of my classmates, I had two classmates with me, so three of us, to draw a very complicated mosque in Ahmedabad. Because he was interested in getting such documentation of historic structures. Because he had also come, when we went, he had also come to Ahmedabad just a decade ago. And he was getting interested into the monuments of Ahmedabad. And this mosque, which is known as Rani Rupamati Mosque, if you prefer anywhere, you will see what was the complexity of this mosque. He gave us to draw this entire mosque with its total carvings, which means we had to really do freehand carvings, after measuring. So this was my first task of documentation. And we learned by ourselves, We had no teacher to tell us there how to, and we had to use measures, because I think this was not just this visual kind of sketching, but it was actually reduced to drawings. And at the end of our training, after I think about 12 weeks, we produced a portfolio of measure drawings for Mr. Doshi. This was our beginning. And this actually ingrained in us. We also got ourselves very interested in doing this kind of work. So when I continued further, I started study of Ahmedabad city, the historic city, and the timber houses in the city, and my journey to documentation continued. But it was all self-learning. I came into exposure of, actually instructed learning on documentation only when I came sort of in touch with my British friends who used to come to Ahmedabad to study modern architecture of Ahmedabad. And through them, I really, got the information about courses in documentation in England. Because England was one of the most conscious countries to respect their historic traditions and historic heritage. So this is something which started as a journey, and I have never stopped it because I continuously taught in studios, one part of my studio exercise was always study of an existing building. And then in my own studies on architecture, I started with studying temple architecture. Also in my related study program course in the school, we used to take students to different locations where they did measure drawing. And the idea for the faculty was to really come up with a monograph of each, like you are doing here, of each related study tours into a monograph. So that was also a total involvement because the faculty chose the area and the students went there, they did measure drawings under the instructions of the faculty. And then whatever they produced was published by the school. So this is how I began, and it has not ended. I have done several documentation, several publications, several studies on architecture where documentation was the basis to record the buildings. In history, I never taught from books. I took examples of buildings nearby and threw students in front of them. They had to study, draw, raise questions, and this kind of process really developed a huge conversation on history in the class. So this is something, which has been a kind of continuous process for me, which is continued even now. Thank you.
That was a very, very interesting question because of another reason. There is a philosophy, I don't know who said it, but at the moment I am saying it. So it's about, you won't know where you are reaching if you don't know where you began from. Indirectly saying that where we begin really in a way influences or decides or whatever where you end up with. I thought of not saying anything, but after you said, I'm getting prompted to say this. My journey began way back in 1981-82 when George Michel and John Fritz were conducting what was then called as Humpy documentation camps. And I was a fourth year student of architecture or something like that. Final year, I think. Yeah. So in between there was certain gap happening in the academic classes for some reason. And they were inviting students to come and work at their Humpy documentation camp. It was an international camp. So we had somebody from Australia, we had somebody from we had one Malaysian, we were a small group. And I still remember this. And they asked us, so three of us were sent to this underground temple in Hampi. You'll be knowing, sir, there is always water. So we had said, we have to do the sketch and then bring it back in the night, sit in the tent. There was also an open air underground tank. We'll all sit on that platform. And then we'll show the sketches we did to George. John Fritz was more for urban studies and settlement study of history. So then George would look at the sketches. I still remember this. He looked at one of my sketch and he said, there's something missing here. And no, I looked at all. He said, see, there's a very complex, very interesting column. And this kind of a column in the capital cannot have the number of cornices or whatever, or whatever number of moldings. He said, there has to be one more molding somewhere here. Tomorrow go and check. So next day I go and I found out there was a very small little molding or cornice or whatever you may call in between where I dropped. So the sense of observation was weak in my case, and I still remember this example a lot. Then of course one continues to do a thesis on Hampi, but not on documentation, but on, it was more of an analytical thesis, but looking at Hampi resettlement. Then one goes to urban design masters, but there was not much of documentation, but then we were studying the old cities like Alwar and all of them. Urban design thesis on Jaipur, where one looked at old Jaipur and Vidyadhar Nagar. Then went to Banaras Ghats, and we were looking at restoration of the Banaras Ghats. That took me to UK, 1 year, Masters in Heritage Conservation, came back to Bhubaneswar. So what happened was, for long many years, then one continued on heritage-related activities. Only when I came back to Bangalore in 1992 and 1993, you can say, got more into academics and into subsequently into eco-friendly architecture. But of course, conservation still continues. So, what we notice in this journey, very quickly, why is this journey important? Even today, the kind of eco-friendly architecture that we are designing with is hugely influenced by the past. So the villages, which also mentioned about vernacular architecture and all that. So at one time, if I were to say very jokingly, at one time, I thought I had no future because I was only looking at the past. But that looking at the past has given a future. So although all of you are interested, do look at the past very critically, it may give you a future.
I sent that already. You sent to whom?
We will be winding up shortly because I think but there are one or two other queries which he has compiled.
Send it like that.
Will be brief, but it's only fine.
There is one query online. What speaks to a jury or any individual's soul? Hand-done sketches or digital drawings? I'm sure we know the answer, but we'd definitely like to hear the word.
So the question is,
What speaks to a jury or any individual's soul?
speaks to a jury, in other words, what the juror would look forward to, whether it's a hand-drawn sketch or a digital. Yeah, you can say so.
We can put it that way, yes.
You've already answered, she said. Okay, on behalf of the jurors, I'll say hand-drawn sketches. That. Incidentally, whoever has asked this question online, see, even when we said digitization, it was said right from day one. It's also there mentioned, I think. You can always do a hand-drawn sketch, scan it, and then put it as part of what one is doing. And even in the compilation of the books, you will notice in many, many areas there are these kind of sketches around. Yes.
You see, what I would really look for is how one looks at a building. I mean, you know, what I always insist with the students is that you should be able to talk to building. Building is your book. We don't have volumes, which describe buildings. No, that's not acceptable. Because this is something which is a subjective view. So each one of us have to understand that if we need to understand a building, we should be able to develop a medium between the building and ourselves. So how do you read a building? And then if you read a building, how do you talk to a building? Kahn used to always say, brick wants to say something. I mean, this is something which he very emotionally said, that brick wants to talk to you. So I think you should read this. And if you really make it, I have done this, I've really done this extensively. If you try to stand in front of a building and try to talk to a building, and if you are able to develop an ability to listen what the building tells you, then I think you can do a good building. And for all this drawing, because what the building tells you, you should be able to draw. Now that's where the test lies, of how imaginatively you can build. And that is the key, in your discipline. So this, I would really like to say this, that as a jury, I would really like to understand somebody's dialogue with a building. And in whatever best manner, you can sketch it with your hands. Because what you listen from a building, only your hands can transfer. And that's where the synthesis happens in the mind. So all these hectic, sort of perceptions that you need to develop is you should touch the building. You should touch the material. You should feel how it really lies. In Karnataka, there are a number of examples, which actually even give you sound, which means that if you tap a pillar, it will give you a sound. So there are so many things involved, in architecture. And I think if you can really get to this in maximum number of ways, I think it can really make you a very sensitive human being. So this, what one would expect as a jury is to an honest expression of how you are talking to a building through your sketches.
Okay, let's go on to more, because there are queries.
Yeah, I think we can take offline
Okay,
questions.
anyone here, please? We had announced
You can
this.
stand up and.
We had announced this session for 5 at post college. 5. We can go a little beyond the 5 p.m. Yes. Moonam, Samadhi Lakshman. Yes, please. Can you be a little louder?
So this topic was about the documenting, this documenting. So my
So this topic was about the documenting the historical building. So my question is about the sheet presentation, which I have faced confusion while we were doing the drawing. So documenting the building, making the plans, technical drawings is the one thing, and then composing the sheet is the another. So what would the jury expect, whether complex or interesting sheets or simple presentation? That was my question.
Okay, I have one liner answer before I pass it on. The purpose of whatever we are doing at the end of the day in drawing is not presentation, it is communication. It's communication. It is not beautification. Right? So as long as there is an effective communication, any kind of presentation is fine. Of course, one is not trying to disqualify or qualify any one type, but I'm just trying to say communication is very important. Then the other important word, not beautification, but representation. He was saying it one way, I'm saying it another way. He was talking about reading the building and talking to the building. Is that structure which you have studied, is it properly and adequately represented in the so-called presentation you're talking about? So, there are this kind of duality. I'm just putting two words pitching against each other. So, beautification versus representation, or presentation versus communication. Over to.
In a lighter note, I was just going to say, if you're writing a CV, what would you put about you? It's as simple as that. What you want to. Would you write the same CV for your job as well as for the matrimonial? It's like that. It should communicate.
I agree, it is communication, but communication in language of architecture. You see, because this is very important, and that's why from first year you are actually instructed on what is the language of architecture. So this is what is expected. So you learn a different language, and through that language you try to express your ideas on drawings. But you must understand that when you really look at a sheet of drawing, it's a very serious sort of issue of design. How do you design your sheet so that not a square inch of the drawing paper is without information? So it is equally an issue of design. So when you are in this kind of a creative field, in fact in life there is nothing which is non-design. Everything is design. And you are designing that. You see, your mind is doing that. I mean, right from your activities, everything is a design thing, you know. Because if it was not, then you would topple, because gravity is the force which is acting on each and every one. So if your movement was not designed by your brain, you would fall. If you don't speak properly, which is also a very sort of important craft of communication, then you will confuse people. So there is nothing which is not designed in life. So I don't think you should distinguish that design is here and there is no design there. And don't use the word like simplicity, because it's a very complex thing to become simple. And simple and being simplistic is something between that there is it's a razor line that you have to cross. To be simple, I think you have to make tremendous efforts. And when you talk of real design, it is something which is extremely simple. It is not simplistic. So there are various things, which I think you should read, you should observe, and you should try to record. So these three things are very important for all the students, who are involved in creative activities. And for that matter, nothing is that is not creative.
I'd like to hear him saying that in life there is nothing which is not non-design as everything is design.
Good evening, everyone. At first, I would like to thank Sadhya sir and Tanuja for including field notes back into LIK, because I remember doing LIK since 3 years, since I was in first year. For the last 2 years, which is first year and second year, we used to have teams when we used to start LIK. After the brief decode, all the teams used to go to the structure that we have selected, and the drafting team will start with the measuring, the documentation team will work on documentation, a few teams will click photographs. It used to happen like that. But this year something changed, and because of field notes, and after the query session we had with the Sadhya sir, all the team, which was 30 students, were given a piece of paper, and on the first day, everyone for 2 days just roamed around all of the structure, observing the structure, which was very unique, and for the first time, we saw a lot of things change in our documentation process. So I would like to thank you for that. And coming to my question, it is for Sugandha ma'am. Like you said, place the monument in the context of society and landscape. So my question is, how important is understanding the people and the culture in order to understand a structure? And how should we proceed with understanding the people and the community?
So what he's also saying to say is structure is also physical structure and the way one uses a structure. So, so when I used to be involved, so this comes from my own experience, when I used to be recording the structures, the spaces. So what used to happen is, so there is a monument, you record the monument. Say for example, I'm recording a step well. Fine, I've recorded, I've documented, and probably even I've gone ahead and restored it also. But if I don't think about how water is coming to the step well, it's a failure. So every project that I was actually working on, I always in the end of the project, I'm talking about documentation project or a restoration project, I was always left with this unsettling idea that I'm only looking at the historical or a historic monument. For example, he mentioned about the underground Shiva temple which he recorded. I also recorded 20 years later the same structure. And there was always this discomfort about how did the water come there? And the structure is standing there for like 400 years. Was it planned that way or not? So if I was only recording that, it leaves me, or even like simple things. Any of these water structures if you see, even today it will be open to the air. Rain, water comes and water flows out. How are they, this is One, in the context of landscape. In the context of society, why I will tell you is, I'm recording a structure. It's a monument for me. I'm working in the hot sun. If it's a temple, if it's a monument, which is a temple, which is a monument, I'm working, and I'm asked to remove the footwear and then work. Will I be able to walk on the hot stones barefoot? But I am doing it. There will be local people requests, local people beliefs. These also let me think about it. So that's when I started understanding, I started looking at the local people as part of the structure. So it is complex, not as simple. And there are a lot of vignettes like this, which made me think, what is heritage for me may not be heritage for somebody else. I remember doing a heritage walk in Bangalore, Gavipuram, and there was this very senior person. I was showing all the Kempegowda towers to him. And then he was like, okay, now show me architecture, show me buildings. And I'm like, heritage, I want to see heritage. And I'm like, I am showing you this. He was not ready to accept because for him, heritage was monument. So these kind of things come out. So these are the things when I say society, think about it, involve. It's not only just culture, what it means. So I hope I answered your question.
See, there is someone.
Already asked.
No, someone just popped up.
This one.
Second one.
She already told me.
Say the last word. Well, there's nothing called last word. There's always a word after the last. Yeah, but I will say a few things. But before that, I would like to thank Assam team for giving me this opportunity again and again to be with them year after year. For the last about 10 to 12 years from the days of Nadi Gandhi Trophy. Now feel like it. Of course, I'm going to pass on the mic to you and where is it? Yeah, where is it? Okay, somewhere there. I'm anyway going to pass on the mic to you people because you are going to be giving the last word, not me. But before I give my real last word, also thanks to the eminent erudite scholars we have here today. Selecting the jury for LIK has been my big challenge. I do know that on some occasions I delay, and they keep on reminding me, Satya, we still haven't got the theme. Satya, we still haven't got the jury list. And finally, when I give this, I say, we don't have much time now left, not because of me. I assume my own personal standard one wants to achieve is pretty high, so we have been doing it. But thanks very much for being with us and also to Partha. Today is Saturday. On Thursday, I was in Manipal. On my way in a bus from Mangalore to Manipal, I was sitting next to somebody who was also having a bald head and graying beard like me. So I belong to a generation where we love to talk to each other. My daughter always jokes saying that Appa can talk to a boulder, Appa can talk to a stone. Not in the weak kind of sense of talking to a building, I can talk to anybody like. So we just went to chanting, we saw some big banners around saying Dhakke Bhali. So I was casually asking, sir, I'm seeing a lot of these banners here, what is this banner about? And he was shocked. He said, oh, that's Dhakke Bhali, you don't know about it. I said, no, I don't know about it. Then he said, the Modebitri Dhakke Bhali is very famous. I said, what is it? And he said, this is happening once in 2 years. And it happens along the sea beach. Little away from the sea, not exactly the beach. So it's in a kind of a very forested kind of an area. So there is this Vana Devate, the Vana Devate, which is like a Devi who is in the Vana. So Devi is in the forest. There's no electricity there, so it's all oil lamps. So that starts around 10 o'clock in the night and winds up around 5 in the morning. So I thought, wow, this is something very interesting. So wanted to really go there. But then, I went to Manipal and I was asking here and there. Nobody was trying to help me out, and I asked them, if I want to come back to Manipal around 2 o'clock in the morning, how do I come back? Nobody had answered. And I asked in the School of Architecture, some of them didn't even know about Dhakkebali, which is okay. But then one student of architecture thesis student came by and then he said, sir, I'll drive you around. So we went. We missed the main part of the ritual when we reached, unfortunately. We reached around 11:30 or something in the night. So there was this place in the night, it was looking very mystic with the oil lamps. There are also a few petromax, as we used to call them, as that one. Now we call it as a gas lamp. So the gas cylinder is below, and on top we have that thing which burns in the gas. No electricity. But it was still a little dark and lit and dark and lit and all of them. All that one could see is these little hazy, dark things. Later I found out were the big rocks and boulders. And there were a lot of these veins going around the trees and all that. So it had a mystic kind of a place, and with oil lamps, people going around in silence, and spiritual music, some little ritualistic dance happening around. All that was going on in a very small area comparatively, but it was something it was something extremely experiential. And I told this friend of mine, already thesis student, hey, tomorrow morning we have to drive back with the same road. I said we'll want to come here in the daytime and see what this place really is. So next morning we come back there. Now it's all daylight, of course. So one could see everything properly. And the strangest thing I never saw before that was, there were peacocks moving around very happily and people were sitting around meditating or walking. Peacocks are not bothered about people. So it's all happening around that in that Vanadevate place, Dhakkebali, Dhakkebali. To cut the long story short, why am I saying it? Sir was speaking about the need to read a building, talk to a building. I'm connecting what he said here to what happens before a building. There was no real building there. There was a kind of, there were a lot of these oil lamp stands. There were one or two structures put up for hanging those petromax or the gas lamps. So in the one sense, there was a building, there was an enclosure, you can say. There was an intervention, one can say. In another sense, there was no building. There was nothing which was roofed at all, but there were structures. These frames were there. Some flower decorations were there. So in a way, yes, there was a spatial intervention, or in a way there was no building. And in a way, this I want to go mention the student's name. His name is Chris Morris. So somebody else in the morning next were asking us, and he said one thing to them. He was answering their question. Oh, you went there, what was there? He said to those people who asked, he said, for me it was like I went back in time by some 200 years, he said. Very unique way of saying. He said, I went back in time by 200 years. Of course, I am a professional. I brought in a little more seemingly serious or big sounding names. I said, for me it was like going back to primitivity and nativity. So there was something like, very native about it, something very primitive about it, experience we are talking about. After going in the daytime, for a short while I thought I should not have gone in the daytime. I thought I should have just kept the memory of going there midnight and feel that nativity and primitivity with those oil lamps there. But anyway, so there is something which is there before the building. And when we say there is something which is there, I'm using a metaphor from J. Krishnamurti. He often refers about what is. Those of you who read his philosophy. And he says there is. And then something to happen, become. And J. Krishnamurti always speaks about these contradictions in life. And he says many of our conflicts come from what is, and then what should be, he says. And most of us end up going through this conflict from what is and then what should be. And of course he says freedom from the known and all of them. He says if we can live a life where we can gain freedom from the known. When we say freedom from the known, it doesn't mean one has to go through, one has to forget everything. No. It doesn't mean you have to go through dementia. No. It's in a very philosophical sense. He says freedom from the known. And of course he says every morning if you see a mango tree, every morning can you see the tree as if you are seeing it for the first time. Then there can be true learning. If you don't look at it from that sense of seeing for the first time, then the memories, what we have seen in the past, they tend to dominate our learning of the tree. Freedom from the known in that sense of the word. So it doesn't mean to erase the memory, but memory will be there, but you have to go beyond. So the same thing also applies to buildings. Because one of the point I just now mentioned is this before the building. Somebody also mentioned beyond the documentation. Use the word beyond the documentation. Thank you on that. So before the building, and then connect it to the way we need to observe a building every morning afresh to learn from it. So with these, I'll pass on the mic to Tanuja. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of NASA India Council, Louis I. Kahn Trophy has always been extremely special, even for us as council members. We have one of our ex-council member, Ajay, sitting here just for this. So I can only imagine, because just with the association, there is a lot of learning. I can only imagine the learning that one person has when they participate in a LIK trophy. Every year, it's always an enriching experience, and there's a lot of learning, a lot of perspective shifts that happen. I would definitely want to thank our dear jurors and our dear moderator, Sir Satya, for making this whole trophy and panel discussion, along with the jury, run completely smoothly. And of course, I have to thank Reva University for their extreme, well-handled jury and the way they've done things. Great appreciation, of course, to all the volunteers, one and all. And I would pass on to Likith for the vote of thanks.
Well, I would like to start with first thanking our jurors and our moderator and of course Reva University, the Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, Director Sir, HOD of School of Architecture, and the NASA Coordinator Architect Suruchi Ma'am for also for being coordinating and making sure that the jury goes well. And lastly, the unit secretary and the unit designee of Z538, Reva University, Charan and Kritika Shri. And apart from that, a list of volunteers also whom I would like to thank, who were there last night helping me pin up with all the sheets. Shubham, Ahmed, Krisha, Kishore, Likith, Risha, Aisha, Shoaib, Tanisha, Gautika, Pritika, Carolyn, Renuka, Bhargavi. So we would like to thank all who were involved in this process, and thank you everyone once again. Yeah, to the volunteers who are here, please come on to the dais for a group photo.
Come.
Also, Director Sir and HOD of School of Architecture. So please join us. And also all the faculties are present here.
Someone should handle this now. Excuse me, sir. Live video ಆಗ್ತದೆ. Ma'am, shall we off this live? Yeah, I do this.